Hello, and welcome back to Scottish Independence Podcasts. We are having a look this week at another speech, which John Swinney has given. And this one was at the University of Edinburgh. We're going to put the link below if you want to go watch the full thing, because it really is quite an interesting speech. And it was in the wake of Mark Carney's speech at Davos about the rupture that has occurred in world politics. So we thought it was interesting that John Swinney was following up on that. And there were some very interesting points in the speech. So we, as we often do, we've picked out the bits that we liked, but do watch the full thing yourselves. And
just so you know, some of the clips we didn't like. That's why we've clipped them. And the speech was called "A Moment of Challenge."
The first clip we've got is John Swinney outlining what the threat is, who's the threat coming from as well.
Scotland's power may be small, but our location in the world is significant, given that we sit at one end of the strategically important Greenland-Iceland-Scotland gap. We are the most northerly non-Arctic nation and have a role to play in the effective defence and sustainable development of the High North and the Arctic. We are a proud European nation and seek also to be a constructive and engaged global citizen. Stop the world, Scotland wants to get on, was not only a political slogan expressed powerfully by Winnie Ewing, who exemplified the outward-looking sentiments that I will talk of today, but it was also a statement of intent. It spoke to who we are and what we want to become. If we could stop the world, perhaps we could also rewind the world, taking us back to before Brexit, in the hope that we could change that particular choice. But of course, we must face the world as it is, and not the world as we wished it could be. And that is a world where, last week, because of President Trump's threats in relation to Greenland, there was a real concern that next week the United States and Europe would be engaged in an open trade war. Let us be clear, it is thanks to a resolute response from across Europe, through NATO and the EU, that the threat of tariffs, in effect economic sanctions wielded in order to force through a change in international borders, was removed. It was an unprecedented action by an ally, yes, but one more than matched by something more familiar. We saw a powerful and unified response that produced results, with the nations of Europe standing firm behind fundamental principles of sovereignty and self-determination. On two occasions now, in less than a year, the threat of a transatlantic trade war, with all the damage it would do to jobs, family incomes and the wider economy, has been a real possibility. But it is about more than trade. The foundations upon which we have built so much have been shaken in a way that I never ever thought possible. And yes, cracks have appeared. Cracks that tell us those foundations need urgently to be rethought and renewed. After the turbulence of last week, it is only natural for all of us to feel a profound sense of relief that the worst of our fears did not unfold.
It's interesting because listening to it again, that's the second time I've listened to it, and he comes over more, more kind of forcefully, even statesman-like, than I kind of came away with when I watched the whole of the speech. And do you know what that reminds me of? That reminds me of the conversation that you and I had with Isabel Lindsay and Bill Ramsey recently, when we were talking about the whole Greenland, how Trump's upset things with that Greenland, I want Greenland nonsense. But Isabel said something quite similar to what John Swinney said there about it's a time we need to rethink. It's a time to rethink. If there's been a rupture, if things have been thrown up in the air a bit, actually, let's not back off that. It's not necessarily a bad thing for us. Thinking about Scottish independence, that could be a good thing. And he didn't obviously say that just now, but it's in the same area, isn't it?
Very much so. We'll put the link to that episode in the notes as well. It's called On Thin Ice. There's obvious links, as you say, as when he's speaking. I mean, it's interesting you should say that. I think he is quite forceful in this. And the next clip we're going to come up with again, I didn't think he pulled many punches, put it that way, which I quite like.
I quite like as well. I wish he'd do that a bit more.
Yeah, indeed. This next one is about, well, the difference between the UK and Scotland. And he's quite clear that there is a difference.
And I'm very conscious that what is in the national interest of the UK is not always in the national interest of Scotland. An independent Scotland would, quite rightly, have the ability to and would make different choices. Our worldviews overlap in many important ways, as you would expect. But unlike the UK, Scotland has no need and no desire to project power on a global stage. While Britain may choose to spend billions of pounds on nuclear weapons, that is a choice. That's not a choice any Scottish government would make. Like our Nordic neighbours and peers, an independent Scotland would seek to contribute to collective defence as a member of NATO, and in doing so, take responsibility for the proper defence of the strategically important waters and airspace around our shores. And as the far north opens up, a northern nation like Scotland is well placed to play her part. It does not require a long memory to recall that the UK, while increasing investment in nuclear bombs, chose to scrap its entire maritime patrol fleet and its replacement. The United Kingdom has chosen not to base a single offshore patrol vessel, frigate or destroyer in Scotland, requiring vessels to be dispatched from the south coast of England when the flagship of the Russian Northern Fleet arrived off Scotland. As the new head of the Secret Intelligence Service, Blaise Messerwili, reflected last month, we are now operating in a space between peace and war. And it's the sort of hybrid war which requires adequate, multi-layered naval capability in Scottish waters to protect our offshore energy assets, to protect our underwater cables, and adequate air defences in Scotland to deal with threats to our airports, as happened across Northern Europe, from drones. An independent Scotland would not leave these gaps. Instead, the UK prioritises weapons that offer nothing in the face of actual day-to-day threats and which do not deserve the description of being independent. Westminster politicians may desire the power to destroy the planet, but for a Scottish government, the priority would be the adequate defence of our waters and our shores.
That's very good.
Again, isn't it good? And lots of echoes in what he said there. Maybe he watched our On Thin Ice episode,
Yes, he did.
but there were echoes in
Well,
there.
I mean, we know that Alex Salmond used to watch us, so maybe
do,
John's
yeah.
taken take out of his book.
Indeed, but I mean that point about they're choosing to invest in pointless weapons because that whole nuclear arsenal, which is not ours, it's not an independent deterrent, as he said there, but also you can never use it. It's just a big stick, so somebody else doesn't hit you with their big stick.
Actually, I hadn't picked up that the offshore patrol vehicles bit of the Navy had been scrapped. I mean, I know they've put a big order in. Well, it's a joint order, isn't it, with Norway to get patrol vessels? But I mean, that's going to take years to get them built. I think some of them are getting built on the Clyde. Another thing I noticed was that he could have said, well, he did say that they're putting money into weapons that don't meet the current needs, especially of Scotland, but really anywhere. I thought, yeah, and he could have mentioned the new tanks that look like they're going to have to be scrapped, having spent billions on them, because the guys inside are getting ill and coming out and collapsing on the ground and shaking all over. So they've you think, okay, maybe he just decided he'd be kind and not mention that.
Who fights in tanks nowadays anyway?
Well, the
war
people
takes
who
place.
the Russians do still. I mean, actually, the Ukrainians have got our tanks as well. The Russians do, but actually, the Ukrainians can wipe a tank out which costs millions with a little drone that probably cost $1,000. It's not where it's going, is it? It's warfare.
No.
You can see it from the way that what's happened in Ukraine. The kind of weaponry, and how you use them have really, really changed.
I mean, the couple of things that I picked up in that one was he mentioned cables, which again, our conversation with Isabel, our defences, things that we need to defend. Undersea cables is a big thing, as will offshore energy as well, I suppose, would be. But the other thing, that point about none of these things are based in Scotland.
The power lies in the decision making, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's the
and
decision
the
makers
control.
who decide. The guys in the Navy who say we need to get out quickly.
And that just reinforces the point he's making about this. These aren't the kind of defence decisions Scotland would make. Because look at the size of our coastline.
Yeah.
Look at the threat to us from, illegal, even drugs coming into the country, as well as the cables and things. There's all sorts of customs kind and excise kind of things as well. So the fact that we have nothing, it just seems ridiculous. But as you say, it's who's making the decisions.
Certainly the undersea cables, whether they're power cables or communications cables. I mean, the North Sea, there must be loads of them in the North Sea, but actually there's a load of international cables that go from the UK and Europe over the Atlantic to to the States, and it's not all done by satellites. A lot of it is still done with undersea cables, and those are vulnerable.
Yeah.
Okay, well, so far I have to report that I'm feeling a bit more engaged with Mr. Swinney's what he's saying now that I'm hearing it again, than I kind of was when I heard. Maybe I was just having an off morning or something, but
or maybe it's because we've just picked out the juicy bits. There was quite a bit of fluff, as what I would describe as fluff. So the next juicy bit that I've come to, he had a real dig at Rachel Reeves, which always gets in brownie points in our book.
In the midst of last week's events, the Chancellor Rachel Reeves made the comment in Davos that Britain will not be buffeted around. But as Mark Carney's Davos speech so eloquently analysed, that is exactly the fate that awaits those who fail to see and fail to prepare for the new reality that confronts us. Right now, Britain's place in the world, Britain's choices, leave Scotland more vulnerable. Because of Brexit, Britain is diminished. Because of Brexit, being buffeted around is exactly Britain's fate. An insular attitude has separated us from our nearest neighbours, leaving us unnecessarily and dangerously exposed. A return to the EU should not be seen merely as a knee-jerk response to the current context. This year marks 10 years since the Brexit referendum, and year on year the scale of the Brexit disaster becomes more apparent. Bit by bit, Britain is being broken by a Brexit that has left families worse off, that has meant less money available to invest in public services like the NHS. The price we are paying is real, the damage accumulating. We are poorer outside the EU. We are less safe outside the EU. While the improvement in the EU's relations with the UK is welcome, a response that is nothing more than closer alignment or a mere reset of relationships or even a new customs union but not the customs union is no way sufficient. Not for the first time, the people are way ahead of the politicians on this simple truth, on this reading of our new reality. Polling in both Scotland and across the UK points to that fact. But the truth is that a Westminster that too willingly dances to the tune of the very forces that extracted us from the EU is not capable of taking Britain back into Europe. And so Scotland does face a choice.
That's just excellent.
It's quite to the point, wasn't he?
It is. It's just excellent and quite forceful. And there was one or two things that one was that have come to mind, and it's about. Okay, so one of the previous clips he mentioned being. There was certainly an assumption that Scotland would be part of NATO, and of course that is now. It wasn't SNP policy for a long time, but it was changed some years back. And when he said it, I did think, yeah, he'll get pushback over that. Not everyone in Scotland's going to want to join NATO. Although, actually, given the situation with Russia and given that, gosh, Finland and Sweden joined in, especially Sweden, long-term neutral, country, and then Sweden, I think that kind of moves the dial a bit on what would be in Scotland's best interest.
Yeah.
So there was that bit. And now he's talking about the EU. And again, he'll get pushback on that from, people who don't see that as the way forward. However, the polling in Scotland, I think, is about 70% in favour of rejoining the EU. But the thing that he touched on this earlier on in the talk. He referred to Neil MacCormick, Professor Neil MacCormick, and so some time ago there was a paper. I'm not sure if it's a paper or a book. But it's called Beyond the Sovereign State, and Mr. Swinney kind of just picked up some idea. He didn't go into a lot of detail, but he picked up some ideas there, and I was taken with that because look, I mean, you and I know, Fiona, within the Yes movement, there's a lot said about sovereignty of the people. Absolutely fair enough. Scotland would be a sovereign state, and then you get, well, why would we give up our sovereignty by moving back into the EU? Why leave one union and join another union? Now, there's lots of ways in which you can refute that because comparing apples and pears, the same thing. But there is something about sovereignty and what that means, and what the bits that he quoted from Neil MacCormick actually made me think I might go and see if I can get hold of that book or get the source of it. Because he's talking about it going beyond the sovereign state. And the basic question is, okay, yes, of course, a country is sovereign. Every country is. It's not just something to do with Scotland, although we've got a particular historical kind of way of thinking about that, which goes back to Robert the Bruce. But then what would it mean to be, does sovereign mean you don't set up alliances with people? Does sovereignty mean you don't enter into treaties with people or agreements with people? Of course, it doesn't mean that.
No, it means the opposite. It means you can. You've got.
Yes, it means you can. Exactly. It means you can. We would be able to in ways that we're not at the moment because we're part of the UK and they don't want to do that, right? Yeah. But there's something about I think he pulled out a just really interesting way of getting out of that either or mindset that I'm afraid you do see it in the Yes movement.
You do.
I don't think you really hear it from the unionists, but then they kind of don't have many arguments anyway.
No.
Guys, we can't give you the whole speech, otherwise it would just be the whole speech. But go and watch this bit because he does go into about power, sovereignty and power and the limits of power.
Sir Neil spoke of the difference between politics and law, between power and order. As for politics, Neil wrote, I shall allow the late Aneurin Bevan's dictum that politics is about power. More exactly, politics is essentially concerned with the power of decision-making in human communities on matters of communal interest or importance, with competition for that power and with its exercise. As for law, the essence is not power, but normative order. Wherever there is law, there is normative order. Wherever there is normative order institutionalised, there is law.
Power does need to be limits. I mean, look at what's happening in the States just now. I mean, Congress doesn't seem interested in limiting Trump's power, but it's meant to. That's the whole thing about the balances. And he talks quite a lot about that and how one of the things that limits power is law and order. And those are embedded in things like European Human Rights Convention and how the EU countries, what they agree to accept about how they'll treat each other and talk to each other. And it's just fascinating. It's a much more nuanced way of thinking about sovereignty, its benefits, and how you can move beyond it for even more benefits.
Right. So this is where he starts talking about solutions to all the issues he's just outlined.
The answer, however, is not to abandon hope or retreat behind our own walls. It is not to let institutions crumble, but to be the voices arguing for their value and, where necessary, their modernisation and their reform. In a changing world, with new challenges emerging, from climate change to questions around the role of AI, we need an international system with the confidence and the flexibility to adapt and evolve. And that is where organisations like the Scottish Council on Global Affairs have such an important part to play, so that Scotland's distinctive perspective, Scotland's particular needs and interests are part of these very necessary global conversations. Some will argue that Scotland should let the UK speak on matters of world affairs. I say that Scotland should make her voice heard. We must not give up on cooperation, but be smart about it. Because even amidst the shifting sands of the current global order, collective action works. We saw European coordination and leadership in response to provocations around Greenland, and we continue to see it in response to Russian aggression, especially in relation to Ukraine. For Scotland, regional cooperation is vital. That includes cooperation on these isles. Whatever Scotland's constitutional future, England, Wales, Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland will form a distinct family of nations. It is cooperation across the North Sea on energy, for example, with Scotland well placed to contribute to Europe-wide efforts to ensure both energy transition and energy independence. It is cooperation to our north as a focused and reliable partner in NATO's defence of the High North and Arctic. And most importantly, it is cooperation at a European level as part of the EU, because have no doubt, countries in a regional bloc of the size and significance of the EU can achieve the same advantages of reach and scale as any superpower.
That's very good. Yeah, that is very good, and it kind of does hark back to what I was saying about,
Yes.
Sovereignty isn't about isolating yourself. You have to have it, of course, but then you're not in isolation. You're entering into responsible partnerships with other countries, whether it's trade or defence or culture or whatever. That's what we can't do at the moment, to the extent that we need to do it. And that one of the other things he said, I think roundabout there, was that a rules-based order, which is what Trump is attempting to throw out the window or throw off the planet. A rules-based order is also a system of relationships. So there's always backwards and forwards, kind of, okay, we'll do that if it helps you, but then we'd need you to do this. And that's where Scotland needs to be in those discussions. That would be just brilliant, wouldn't it?
It would be. But the other thing he said at the beginning of that clip was something about don't throw out these institutions, but yes, improve on them. Yes, fix them.
Like
if they're
the
not
UN.
working. And I think the UN was one he'd given us the example. I have not heard of the Scottish Council of Global Affairs, though.
I haven't. I did wonder if it might have been connected with Edinburgh University since he's there, but we should find out about that.
We'll have a look and we'll put a link.
As you'll realise by now, folks, this is our strategy. Anytime we come across something on a podcast that we actually don't know about it, we'll put in a link.
For me, the European Union has always offered an inspirational model for the peaceful coexistence of states, an aspirational model of partnership designed to deliver prosperity and security, to foster friendship with powers shared through key principles such as subsidiarity and solidarity. It provided us with a means to be good citizens globally, regionally, locally. To leave the EU was a fundamental error. The United Kingdom wanted control more than cooperation, isolationism rather than partnership. But the Brexit experiment has failed. The United Kingdom is not a superpower, it is an intermediate power. One, yes, with an advanced economy and significant military, intelligence and diplomatic assets behind it, but an intermediate power nonetheless. As a result, Brexit has been and will continue to be an unmitigated economic, political and societal disaster. It has served only to weaken Britain's standing and influence on the world stage. It has served only to decrease people's standard of living here at home. And that's why it's time for Scotland to choose a different path. With the world changing rapidly around us, the most prosperous future, the most secure future, is as a member state of the European Union. Of that, I have no doubt.
He touched on things you were mentioning there about that, joining together of countries. Yeah, I quite like that.
Yeah, it's good.
So that was the highlights we picked up. John Swinney's speech. I thought it was a good speech from him, actually. I thought also, I don't know if it was because he was in a university. I thought it was quite eloquent, and he was sort of using language that maybe is a little bit more flowery than you normally get from him in Parliament. Maybe that was rising to the occasion, or maybe someone wrote it for him. I don't know.
Well, he wasn't speaking to Anna Sarwar, so it could be a bit more, fluent and.
Well, that's a good point. Yeah. But then, having had that speech, which had some really good stuff in it, we then came to the questions. And I've noticed with all the speeches he's done, he separates off the print media, which you don't get to see that bit of the discussion, and it'll surface as a Daily Mail headline at some point. He did take a question from the BBC, and you wouldn't think when you hear this question that we just heard a speech all about how positive things are and how confident we can be in our future, because this is what the BBC chose to ask.
To Andrew Kerr of BBC Scotland. Andrew.
Thank you, First Minister. Now, you were talking about an independent Scotland, but actually when you look at an independent Scotland, perhaps pre-EU accession, would that not be more vulnerable than in the current setup? You also said cooperation is vital. We've got a statement from you in the Bella One in Parliament this afternoon. Opponents may say there's an element of hypocrisy there because you were happy for the captain and the crew to be kept by the Americans in Scottish waters, then anger at the Americans and the UK government when the captain is taken away, perhaps a moment you've seized to create a political argument. There'll be not much evidence of cooperation there.
Miserable git, honestly. It's a gotcha kind of, let's focus in on something and call you a hypocrite and an opportunist. Never mind any of the big global issues that have just been discussed. Miserable, Andrew Kerr. Miserable.
It is, and it was clearly, that question did not arise from the talk. Right,
no,
so he went along.
He
went along with that question in his. I was going to say his back pocket, but it's not. It's probably right. It's just straight in front of him. And as you say, it's just like snide remark
and disrespectful.
Disrespectful.
And the tone of it was.
Yeah, I mean, it's what you just come to expect from BBC Shortbread. But the other thing, and even what he said at the beginning. He said pre-EU accession. He says, "Oh, you've been talking about an independent Scotland." Well, yeah. Despite what BBC Shortbread and others keep saying about how the SNP have probably lost interest in independence. So, and then he goes, "So is it not the case that pre-EU accession, Scotland would be in a more vulnerable state?"
It's Project Fear back again.
I mean, it is, isn't it? And it's also nonsense because, pre-EU accession, well, once you've been accepted as a candidate and you start going through the EU acquis to kind of set things up and they agree, you've done that, you've done the next thing. But before you do anything, they offer you an association trade agreement, an association agreement. So it's like, he knows that.
He knows that, or he should know that. But it's been said, get in there, undermine him, sow a bit of fear while you're at it, and just see what you can do. You've got one chance. Sunday's National, Alan Smith had an article on it, and he was talking about how, because of EU enlargement, they're looking at switching the emphasis. So instead of it being, we give you a little bit, you reach the standard and then you get a bit more. It said, no, let's do it that you get a lot and then you start having to take on the responsibilities as you get there. That would help us. That really will help us when we get there.
That would help.
So that was the BBC blotting their copybook yet again. But the tone of the other questions, I think, they're quite long, some of them, but I thought it was interesting just to hear the way that the audience responded to him. So this first one.
Thank you, First Minister. I really appreciate your ideas on internal and international issues. Bulgaria is very happy and thankful to UK for the support 3 decades ago to join NATO and the European Union. And I myself will be one of the happiest persons when this road back will be finalized. And I wish you full success in this direction.
You know, just the way he starts off, the first thing he says is, "Thank you, First Minister. I really appreciate your ideas on internal and international issues." You know, he'd be the happiest person to see Scotland back.
But respectful, speaking as an
respectful.
equal, not trying to score points.
After the nice Bulgarian, probably consul for Scotland or consul for based in Edinburgh, is Gavin Sullivan, who's at the Edinburgh Law School, and he asked this question.
Thanks very much, First Minister. It's Gavin Sullivan at Edinburgh Law School. You know, the argument about greater collaboration between smaller independent nations and fostering closer ties, strengthening the rules-based order, I think on that we can all agree that that's an important thing that we need to do in the current geopolitical moment. What wasn't much discussed, and that's where my question is coming in, is about what I would call the infrastructural dimension of the current geopolitical crisis that we're in. So, for example, many of the problems we're now confronted with aren't simply a reassertion of the US hegemony of the past in global politics, but they're expressed through the weaponization of infrastructure, financial infrastructure, digital infrastructure in particular, that maximizes asymmetries between countries on the world stage. And the vulnerability here is that our financial and security infrastructure remains deeply enmeshed with US power, with US-based firms in the AI race, whether it's AI platforms or big tech platforms that we're currently articulating our national move towards AI through. So what kind of infrastructural initiatives and developments can we do to maximize our independence, to complement the security and economic vision which you launched today? Because the fear, of course, is that if we don't articulate and if we simply double down on the importance of multilateralism and closer ties, we miss the critical ways through which infrastructural control is being practiced in the present.
That's a long question.
It's a very intelligent question.
It is.
And I think it's interesting that you probably did the same as me. When I hear infrastructural kind of aspects, my ears prick up and I go, well, yeah, because so much of our infrastructure in Scotland, I mean, to be fair, in the whole of the UK, but in Scotland, is owned by private companies, private individuals. They're not owned by us, they're not owned by the Scottish government. So my ears prick up at that. But also, you know, he said, okay, on the one hand, you can talk about multilateralism and cooperating, but if you do that too much, then maybe you miss the chance to think, hang on, we're dependent on somebody else's communication system, on an American company that runs Zoom.
Yes, and in fact, the French government has taken steps to remove Zoom and Teams and use the French equivalent, Visio, I think it is. But that point about weaponizing infrastructure, we're seeing that. Doing. That's exactly what he's doing, and Musk as well. When you hear Starlink, he
threatened to withdraw the Ukrainians' ability to use Starlink to track what the Russians were doing. And, you know, and then he's the kind of guy that, of course, suits Trump down the ground. Well, it did at the time to have him on board. But, you know, any of those hugely rich moguls, and they own, they have all the money stashed away, so that means it's not in the economy. But also, they've got companies that have real power. So, you know, like the way, Trump didn't like it that the Chinese were running TikTok. So he made them sell it, and it's now run by an American company. And now we're hearing stories about, well, then you just have somebody else that's in control of the algorithm. Yeah. Not just social media, obviously, but...
Yeah, it was a very good question. And that example you've just been talking about, it's down to the whims of one individual as well. It's not even a parliament deciding it. Compare the intelligence and thoughtfulness and depth of that question with the hastily scribbled attack line from the BBC, and there's quite a contrast to start with. The third question was from the Norwegian honorary consul, so we'll just hear his question again. Listen to the tone and the respect in how the question is addressed.
Julian Jones, Honorary Consul General for Norway. First Minister, I think we would all agree with you strongly that Scotland has considerable economic opportunities in the energy sector, but I wondered whether you might want to speculate on other possible opportunities, and one which occurred to me is Scotland's strength in critical technologies, particularly with small companies. Which do you think would be the technologies which represent the greatest degree of opportunity, economic opportunity for Scotland in the future? And also, given the kinds of international change which you mentioned to us, which are the international relationships we have where probably the opportunities are diminishing and there may be risk, and which are the international opportunities where the opportunity is growing and perhaps we should look at more closely. Thank you very much.
Thank you. In relation to our economic strengths, you cited the strength in energy, and I think it's pretty well developed and demonstrated. I've just spent a couple of days in London. I was just agreeing on Monday evening a renewed partnership between the Scottish Government and the City of London in relation to the development of financial services. And one of the points I was two of the points I was commending was the very significant growth in asset management capability within Scotland, but then also the very significant attractiveness of Scotland as a location for financial services activity because of the partnerships with our universities, and the university being central to many of the reasons why BlackRock, for example, is located in this city and expanding significantly, but very relevant also in Glasgow with JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley and Barclays as very significant expanded operations. So financial services is another example. I think in given where I am today, I can't possibly not talk about the computing strengths of the University of Edinburgh and the enormous capacity and capability of encouraging and motivating more developments in that respect. And I think that's where the technologies of the future lie. And of course, one of the key strengths that we are developing in partnership with our university colleagues is ensuring that the research power of our universities is deployed very strongly to support the developments within the Scottish economy, and in that area we have really substantial partnerships. Now, in relation to your question about where are our economic relationships, where have they been and where are they going, I want the Scottish economy to be an open economy. I want us to be engaged in international economic activity. I want us to be operating across a range of different partnerships. I think we've done economic harm to ourselves by what was decided about Brexit. So I think restoring our relationships with the European Union is and easing trade flows and business flows is fundamental to the agenda we've got to take forward. The relationships with the United States are, have some volatility about them because of tariffs, and my stance in relation to the activity I've taken forward in relation to whisky tariffs has been, clearly expressed about the fact that there is real damage being done to the industry in Scotland as a consequence of the tariffs. So we need to try to get to a position where we remove these obstacles. But these are just some of the opportunities and challenges that we face in the current context.
It was an interesting answer because, well, it was a long answer, but it didn't really match the question, I don't think. And the guy was specifically asking about small enterprises, and he's talking about the City of London and partnerships with universities, which are on a much different scale.
Yeah. I was, when he starts talking about financial services and asset management, I mean, Scotland already is, after London, I'm pretty certain that Scotland is the second next biggest hub for that kind of activity. And so that's not something that needs to be done. It's already happening. Whether that's a good idea to make it even bigger part of our economy, because if you think about the UK as a whole, one of the problems is that it's now not an economy that makes things. It's a service economy, and financial services is a huge, huge part of that, and it skews everything. I mean, it skews the economy as a whole, but it also skews other things because most of it happens in London. So London becomes very rich. And, oh, God, I just wish he hadn't done that, because that's not what I want for Scotland. I don't want Scotland to be going down the same line of, yeah, we've got a big financial sector, probably based in Edinburgh and Glasgow, well, I suppose Aberdeen as well. But, and then that starts to skew our economy in that way. I don't know. I'm really disappointed with that.
It's a tricky one, isn't it? And we had a previous episode, we were chatting with William Thompson about the implications of certain decisions being made. And I think the question that pops in my mind is, what kind of partnership does the Scottish government have with the City of London? And how is that affected by decisions on, say, constitutional change, new currencies, all these things? And we know there are financial centres dealing with a range of different currencies, so I don't think that's a game changer. But being, integrated in that way, is that actually creating things that we're then going to have to unpick later on? Don't know. And the thing about asset management, that is now drilled into me, having been to a couple of Scottish Currency Group conferences and speaking to William. This foreign direct investment and assets that mean profit flows out of Scotland and not into our communities and into our own economy is a real fear that I have, actually. And it's something that I think I would like more transparency from, not using that as a good answer.
I mean, the other thing is that struck me, there was a question from Gavin Sullivan from the one about infrastructure and infrastructure that's controlled by other countries, but maybe even just big companies or one person who's based somewhere else who can sometimes act on a whim even. So there was that question about it not becoming too caught up in that. How do you avoid that? How do you maintain your own independence within that? And then we get this question, which was a good question from the Norwegian guy.
Yeah.
But Mr. Swinney, is talking about, it's volatile, and then there's tariffs, and we can work to avoid that. But actually, the real answer to the not being caught up with an America that at the moment is just slapping tariffs, everything, is to make sure that your trade isn't always all concentrated with one particular country in the world. And I know that's easy to say and difficult to do much about quickly, but I just thought, really disappointed at that. And as you say, the Norwegian chap actually specifically mentioned small companies, probably because that's the kind of area in the Norwegian economy that they're seeing opportunities, and they probably want to come over here, and we can go over to there, and there can be a lot of joint kind of projects happening. And so I'm a bit.
Yeah, that point you made.
Scunnered, actually, that answer just.
Yeah, I was a bit scunnered about, and that point you made was a really good one just now about the UK doesn't make things anymore, so financial services is huge. But Scotland makes things. You look at our satellites. We've got the huge part of the satellite market. Look at the technology that's tied in with renewables and batteries and heat exchangers, and they're getting energy out of the Clyde and all this kind of research. Which could all spin off into our whole supply chain is built around the energy thing, and he didn't mention any of that.
Once I suppose he'd been there for an hour, maybe given a bit of space here, given a bit of kind of leeway, but there are those. We do make things, and we could make more things, and we could be cooperating with other people, whether it's in the EU or Norway, EFTA, whatever, and then their supply chains get built up in Scotland. But then also you take that to other places. It's not just us that needs skill in setting up renewable energy systems or whatever. So then your supply chain can start supplying people in far away places as well. I just think, oh, come on, Mr. Swinney, you should have been talking about that. Maybe what we should do is get hold of Craig Dale and say, listen, Mr. Swinney was asked a question about what we could grow, and he didn't answer it. So will you please come on and answer it for us, Craig? Because I bet
That
Craig
would
knows
be-
the answer to that.
Craig is also brilliant at the whole assets, money leaking out of Scotland as well. In fact, we should do that.
Yeah.
Consider yourself invited, Craig, if you're watching this.
Have we got any more, or is that us at the end?
Well, there was a question which was a very good one to do with migration, but I wonder if we'll maybe keep that for our refugee episode.
Oh yeah, okay. It was a good question, but it was a long question, wasn't it? We could do it just as elsewhere, I think.
Yeah, we've got an episode coming up talking about migration and refugees with someone from Refugee, so we'll save that question for that. There was also one about education being, Erasmus, that kind of thing, which again was a positively phrased one. And then the last question was about, well, the EU's all very well, but what about other countries that we like Canada? And of course, the answer there was, yes, of course, we'll play with anybody who shares our values. But very, very positive questions, all of them.
Yeah. And although you and I kind of got scunnered by that last one, but I hope we've explained to people just why we're scunnered, and it's kind of just justifiable scunneredness, I think.
Justifiable scunnery, yes. But,
scunnery, scunnery.
Is that a word?
No, it is now. It's definitely a word now. Scunnery.
So anyway, that's the bits we've picked out that speech. Watch it yourself. I'm sure there'll be other things you'll watch. If Mr. Swinney wants to come back to us and say, well, this is what I really meant, feel free. And hopefully you've enjoyed that. One thing I do notice with these speeches, this is the third now, if it wasn't for us going hunting for them and finding them, this one happens to be on YouTube. I think also you can get it from the ScotGov website. Was it covered on mainstream media? I very much doubt it.
No, it's not shortbread enough.
It's not shortbread enough, and also it's some people saying positive things about Scotland, and treating the First Minister of Scotland as if he's a reasonable person who deserves respect for the office he holds.
Last thing, there was mention of the Scottish Council on Global Affairs.
Oh, yes.
So while you were saying something, I was Googling, and you can find that on their website. It looks pretty good, actually. It's just scga.scot. And the first thing you see is a paper that they've just brought out, which is Scottish Council on Global Affairs, State of the World. That's what it's called, the paper. Perspectives from Scotland on Global Changes. It's Scottish universities working together in this affairs. I think it was set up by Edinburgh, Glasgow, and St Andrews universities when it first. But there's other universities involved in it now, so that's worthwhile having a wee look at.
That sounds really interesting. Well, we'll put the link to that in our notes as well. Now we found it, and yes, we should come back to it because that does sound interesting.
Okay,
anyway.
Good.
That's it for us, and we'll see you next time.
Yep. Bye.
Bye. Thanks for listening, everybody. I hope you enjoyed that. If you want to make sure you're following us and subscribe to us, then you get notified every time we put something new out so you don't miss anything. That would be great. Also, you can click the little bell if you're watching on YouTube.
And sign up for our mailing list. You can do that from the website, and we always send one out at the beginning of each month to tell you what's happening. Last but not least, you can buy us a coffee on coffee.com.